It's already recorded.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Now in Indonesia, 10 p.m. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Chris Biantoro. I am a human rights lawyer and also human rights activist based in Indonesia, and work with the ASEAN Human Rights Commission. And today I would like to introduce our speaker, Mr. Ken Daru or Ken Budha Kusumandaru. He is activist, pro-democracy activist, social activist, and also human rights activist. Mr. Daru has a long history. He was a political prisoner under the Suharto regime at the time. He was detained because of his, critical movement against the regime at the time. And Mr. Daru also involved in, People Democratic Party, which is one of the political party that very, very critical against Suharto, and also promoting equality and democracy in Indonesia. And Mr. Daru also, he is also writer, concerned on the social and political issue, and published some book as well. And Mr. Daru also concerned on the, one of the controversial regulation, we call it job creation law, which issued by the current President Joko Widodo under the time of COVID-19, that many people, organization, and also individu prohibit organized public protest, peaceful protest, but the government enacted a controversial law. We call it job creation law, which is according to public opinion and also many labor organization, the regulation in favor of investor, either international and also national investor. So today, our discussion will be led by Mr. Basil Fernando from the ASEAN Human Rights Commission, regional and also international human rights organization based in Hong Kong. So today our discussion will focus on the situation of human rights, democracy, and also law in Indonesia under the COVID-19 situation. Mr. Ken Daru can describe, and also his experiences, how to deal, how to promote democracy and human rights under the Suharto and also under current government. So, Mr. Basil, that is the introduction from my part. So I would like to give the opportunity and time to you, Mr. Basil. So thank you, Mr. Basil. Please.
Okay, Mr. Kandaru, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And could you just give us an introduction about the COVID situation and this new law?
Excuse me, can you repeat that?
Can you just give us a brief outline of the COVID situation in Indonesia and this
At the moment? Yeah.
And also about the this new law.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. The first thing about the situation of COVID in Indonesia is the lack of unified response from the country. So it is not only due to the inactivity of the government, but the whole country cannot act as one unified force against an external threat, which is in this case is a pandemic disease. The country simply doesn't have the resilience against this kind of threat. It is a social and political. The situation has a social and political background in which the country has just came out of a very divisive presidential election, in which it is almost like the country is being torn into, and people are being how can I say suspicious from one another. So it's like whenever one group says something, the other group would deny it just because. So it's kind of impossible for anyone to elicit a unified response against this threat. The government also were very dismissive about the actual level of threat in the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah, but also the civil society did not build the resilience that it should in case of the lack of response from the government. Because as you know, we believe that the civil society is the fortress for the people to defend their rights in case when the government or the power that be is weak or is doesn't have any concern for the welfare of the people. So in this case, when the government have been very slow in responding to COVID threat, the civil society did not step forward and build the resilience that it should. So both the state and the civil society were, as I often said that in several discussions, we are both the state and the civil society the threat of COVID. So this is so it's like a blame game. The government then blame the society for being indifferent, and then the civil society also blame the government, blame the state for being indifferent. So instead of blaming each other, these two forces in the society should act together in unity to confront the problem. But the situation in the background where this country has just come out of such a divisive presidential electoral, this unity is not. I am pessimistic that such a unity can be achieved by any forces in the society, even if some or some groups or even people in the government try to bring about this unity, because the subsequent event when the pandemic has started to kill people, the victim has the mortality rate has started to rise. People are still doing this same thing, blaming each other. You see, lots of arguments are being thrown out in the discussion of COVID. But these arguments and also the people who put forward these arguments, they are loaded with political interest to blame the other side. So this only make the situation worse, in my opinion, because the common people who see this debate at the public discourse, they then they wouldn't know who to believe, because this side blames the other side, and then vice versa. The common people would have no point of reference. Which side is actually correct in this situation, and thus the people just ignore both sides. This is the situation that on the ground at the moment. People doesn't care about health protocol. People doesn't care about being maintaining distance from one another, because this group says it's safe to gather in a religious matter. The government official says it's safe to make a journey as a tourist. So which one to believe? Distrust between groups in responding to COVID. This has made the situation on the ground for the common people. They do not have the I should say point of reference, but it's the exemplar. The exemplar. Who should they replicate? Whose action should I follow? This is the situation, and that's why in this situation, I think it is the role of the civil society to promote this resilience. The civil society should step up and take the responsibility to build the example, to build the resilience, to build the self-help between the people, to make the groups, to build solidarities between the groups. Some of trade unions, as I have heard, have built a barter system with the peasant union, because both groups are hit hard by the lack of transportation and the lack of the market in the peasant groups, hit by the COVID, and also the trade unions are hit hard by the all the downsizing of the factories due to also to COVID, and these two groups, they are helping each other, and this is the practice that the civil society should promote. The civil society groups should help each other during this pandemic. in spite of what the government is doing, because I don't know the real situation within the executive and parliamentary dynamics at the moment. But the fact is, the Indonesian government has always been lacking in the consistency and the drive to anticipate and to alleviate the impact of COVID. So,
could you just tell us now, how did you do in a more difficult times like Suharto's time? How did you work in your context to build that kind of unity and common action? And is that, yeah.
Yep. One of the prerequisite, I think, for making us successful in pushing Suharto down is or was the formation of what we call Majelis Rakyat Indonesia, or Indonesian People Assembly. This is like extra parliamentary parliament. So it's like a broad alliance of political groups. Very broad, in fact, that there were Islamist groups there. There were leftists, even liberal Democrats. So it's like a rainbow coalition. So united against Suharto. This Majelis Rakyat Indonesia, or MARI, did not last long, of course. Its lifespan was cut short after 1996, the crackdown launched by Suharto against all the opposition, starting from the Indonesian Democratic Party struggle down to activists, and also PRD was caught in the crossfire. But the fact that we succeeded in gathering this coalition of very broad political spectrum to unite under one strategic goal. This was, I think, that carried the momentum forward. So, as you know, Suharto was not toppled by just one group. It's, as I think everyone went to the street in 1998. We don't even try to. We haven't even tried to begin collecting all the spectrums that were on the street at the moment. Just everybody just went to the street. I think this was made possible by the success of the movement to band together in the 1996 under this Majelis Rakyat Indonesia. It is this process of building bridges between groups that must be duplicated. We know that all groups will have their own agenda, and these groups are also probably at odds with each other, yeah, and also competing with each other, competing for the resources, competing for the influences among the mass, competing in the propaganda issues. But how to build bridges between these groups? Because all the democratic forces at the moment, or across time, yeah, all democratic forces will have some common issues.
Very
Why?
good. You know, your analysis is very relevant, not only for your country but for several countries in Asia. How to develop bridges among the civil society itself, because of various kinds of small differences and tensions. So this is a very good insight, and also coming from the Suharto's time experiences, it can be very useful. So can you explain any methods and things like that you use to bring about such connection?
I wasn't in the core organizers of Mari, but at the basis, yeah, at among the masses, what I did was building continuous contact with other groups. We didn't care about uh, our differences. I know we will have differences with those groups, yeah, and we did, of course, compete in in even in trying to get the position, to grab the position of uh, general lapangan. What do you call general lapangan in English?
Leader,
Uh,
leader,
Leader of the movement.
yes.
Yeah. So in every mass action, there will be this one person that controls and like orchestrate all the actions, yeah, in the field. So this we call it general lapangan, the field general, yeah? And this position is coveted by every group, because it has such strategic position to control uh, what would happen in the street. We compete with all those groups for this position, but then, because we are in constant communication with other groups, we hold events together, we hold joint actions, we hold joint publication. This we have personal connection, we have comradely relation, personal connection with the leaders of the other groups, and also with their common members. Because if one group has this, as a for example, hunger strike, yeah, then the other groups would come, and we would also hold solidarity hunger strike for a day. Yeah, we would go from the location at the next day, but at least for a day we are joined in the struggle. with those groups. We show solidarity not just by typing this statement, but we come and we join the struggle, even just for several hours, or for in the case of hunger strike, we just did it for just one day. But solidarity is not just a statement. Solidarity is action. That's why I think this personal connection between leaders of the group and also between members of the groups, this I think it could soften the hard edges of competition between groups. And also even if we could say that between PRD and some of the Islamic student movement, we are at odds, and also the antagonism between our groups are very sharp. Yeah, they have tried to sabotage our endeavors or demonstration in the past, but leading up to 1996, we have some joint action with the Islamic Students Association, the Himpunan Mahasiswa Islam. So this is like we knew that these are our opponents ideologically, but they have some grudges against Soeharto, and we need their strength if we want to topple down Soeharto. So we try to build bridge with them. After Soeharto could be toppled, then we could get back to our competition, to get back to our animosity. But this first, going against Soeharto gets priority, and this is what the current movement, the current state of movement should elaborate. What is the priority today that should take precedence, even against all the previous animosity, all the previous competition, even with groups that we consider enemies. This is I think this is the lesson that the current movement, the current groups should consider very carefully.
Yeah. Now, how about this situation regarding the new law that Chris was mentioning?
The job creation law.
Yeah.
Firstly, we have to understand the political economic context of this job creation law. The law is product of two, this is my analysis, two dominant contexts. The first is the upcoming crisis of capitalism, and also the great possibility of the world plunge into depression. This law is the capitalist solution to that to that danger. Yeah, it's a danger to the capitalist class, and the capitalist class have the solution. The solution is this job creation law.
What does the
So-
job creation law means? Can you explain what it is proposing?
It is proposing slashing down all the barriers to trade. It means also uh, cutting down bureaucracy, cutting down workers' resistance, cutting down taxes. These are, I think these are the three what the capitalist system calls barrier to trade. Yeah, bureaucracy, workers' resistance, and also taxes. And so, by cutting down these three barriers to trade, the capitalist class wants to save their own skin during the coming depression. And also, yeah, because this is the capitalist solution to save the capitalist class and the capitalist system, it entails that the cost of saving the capitalist system will be paid by the workers, will be paid by the peasants and the traditional fishermen and the urban poor. This is I think this is the law of capitalism. Yeah, every time capitalism falls into crisis, they would try to save themselves by shifting the burden to the working classes, and that it goes to workers, the peasants, the fisher folks, etc., etc. By cutting down the bureaucracy, it seems like a very noble thing to do, right? The bureaucracy in Indonesia is so inefficient. It's a high cost economy, high cost for the society, and it breeds corruption. So we have to cut down the bureaucracy. But also, the bureaucracy that is being cut down is also the bureaucracy that guarantees the right of the people, that guarantees that every uh, every capital venture would have to adhere to such environmental regulation, for instance. This is also the bureaucracy. So, in cutting down the bureaucracy, the good bureaucracy that was put in place to guarantee the rights of the people was also cut down. And this would only benefit the capitalist class, not the working people. By reducing taxes, well, seems like some noble thing to do, that people would not be burdened by high taxes. But cutting down taxes would also bring the disparity of income, yeah, the inequality of welfare will the gap of inequality will widen, because the rich will not get access. Yeah. And we, the poor, maybe we some of our taxes would be would be eliminated by this reform, by this law. But we would still, the majority of taxes that is paid by the poor people are in form of direct taxes, not in income taxes. So by cutting down taxes, it the impact is not so significant to the working classes than it is for the capitalist class. So it is we can make a long list of the benefit for the capitalist class served by this job creation law. Yeah, and the benefit for the working classes are minuscule, probably 3 or 4 benefit. So yeah, the first situation, yeah, it is still not put in place. Yeah, it is not being implemented, this job creation law, because of COVID and other things. But when it is implemented, Indonesia would probably survive the coming depression, the coming economic crisis. But the Indonesian working masses will not. So as a country, probably we survive, but the burden, who pay the cost of that survival? It's the working masses. But this is only part of the picture. The second part of the picture is that this law is the result of a factional struggle within the Indonesian oligarchic system. As far as my knowledge or my access to information permits, I have identified at least 2 groups, 2 factions within the Indonesian oligarchic system. One that is what I call the liberal oligarchy, and the second one is the old guard, those new order oligarchy. So this liberal oligarchy is the new force that rose during this Reformation era. So these are the capitalists that they are able to exploit the economic space opened by the Reformation, and they have become a new oligarchic force. And they are now in contention with the old guard, the old money, the new order oligarchy. So that is why this job creation law is aimed very heavily, lean very heavily towards liberal side of economic order.
So what would be the count of counter offensive, counter struggle by the workers and the ordinary people for this law? What possibilities are there?
Yeah. As I was saying, this law is the product of the factional struggle. And what what made this factional struggle a possibility is that the workers and the civil society in general does not have the representation in the power circle, in the decision making process of the nation. So the whole decision making process is dominated, yeah, it is now exclusively an arena for factional struggle between the capitalist class. The workers, the peasants, they have no representation in this decision making process, not in the executive, not in the legislature. Yeah. During the new order, we have no we had no opportunity, we had no space to break through to the parliamentary or to the executive. That forced us to work exclusively outside the parliament, outside the decision making process. But now, at the present, the space is there. The space, yeah, permits the working masses to build their own organization, to break through to the decision making process, the political decision making process. And this opportunity has not been exploited by the working masses, has not been exploited by the civil society as organized people. Some members of the civil society, some activists have tried to penetrate this decision-making circle, but they do it as individuals. And these are like minnows, yeah, trying to enter an arena that is populated by sharks. Yeah, and well, these minnows will be eaten by the sharks. But when, yeah, or if civil society can break through this decision-making process en masse, yeah, as an organized force, the balance of power, yeah, in which this decision-making process now only produce laws that serve the interests of capitalist class. If the civil society could break through here, this decision-making process, we could.
So basically, your message is that today the need of the Indonesian people, the ordinary people, the working people, is to build bridges among themselves and to strengthen their own capacity to be able to make their common demands and to alter this kind of reforms that the government is trying to impose, mainly for the benefit of, not for the people, but for itself and the more affluent people.
Yeah, that's the first message. And the second one is so that this power of the people should be used to defend, yeah, against the onslaught, yeah, of the job creation law, but also to try and break through the decision making process so that the formal process to repeal the law could be initiate it, because we need to repeal the law. We need to make it to unmake the law. Yeah. If the working people cannot penetrate the decision making process, we cannot initiate the process to repeal the law, and we need to do that. So build bridges, build communication, build personal connection between the activists, between groups, build common interests, build common movement, build joint movement, build solidarity, and then penetrate. Use this force to try and to grab this to grab this decision making process, make the decision making process work for the people. Let's not keep the oligarchy there. The oligarchy
Yeah,
should not be.
so you what you mean is that by greater unified actions to get a more participatory role in deciding on policies and various measures, and thereby improving the capacity of people to resist and to improve themselves.
Not only resist, but also to force their own decision-making process to the nation, to make their aspiration as a political force.
Yes, that's you are very clear, and I think this is a very important contribution that you make. So how do you see do you see some more positive responses for your kind of approach among the workers and ordinary people, civil society?
There are some talk among the groups, especially the labor union, about this discourse that I mentioned earlier about breaking through. But what we lack at the moment is the theoretical foundation for such process. This is new for us.
Yeah.
We haven't tried this before.
Yes.
And we need to come up with stronger theoretical foundation in order to move forward.
Yeah. How do you propose to get about that? To do that?
I think more discussions among the leaders of the masses. So it's like it's not the leaders of the national movement, but the leaders at the grassroots. They are the ones with practical knowledge. We need to dig up this practical knowledge and help them make an abstraction of this concrete and practical knowledge. Yeah. So the approach is not top down, so that
Yes.
it's like such we gather all the academics and make the study, and not that, but we need to gather the leaders at the grassroots and we help them theorize their own experience in struggle. So it's like the Indonesian movement should come up with their own theory of struggle. Contemporary. for this time and age. And
Yes, this is very very encouraging, and I hope you will have more bottom-up approach and bottom level discussions with the people, among the people themselves, and by that, as you say, is this a new approach to develop a more theoretical basis for improving the conditions of life, as well as the improving the future of the decision-making processes in your country. Do you have anything more to add?
Yeah, I think we need patience, yeah, and perseverance, because we are breaking new grounds. Yeah,
Yes.
We are entering a crisis in which things would seem to go worse and worse. Yeah, we are hit by pandemic. We are hit by crisis. We will be hit by the coming depression, coming economic crisis, and also the implementation of the job creation law. This would call for perseverance. Yeah, things will seem dark and hopeless, and we need to keep telling ourselves there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think things will get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we are, the odds are against us at the moment, against the democratic society, against the movement, against the people. The odds are heavily against us. What we need is perseverance. We have to survive these dark times, so that in the future we will have this. If we have survived something that is so deadly, yeah, the spirit, yeah, would lead us to victory. Yeah, I think that is all I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a very good discussion. I'm sure it will provoke thinking, and maybe we will get opportunity in the future to discuss more with you and also your colleagues.
I'm waiting for your invitation.
Thank you very much for participating in this discussion. And
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Basil. Thank you, Mas Daru. Bye-bye.
Yeah, sama-sama.
Ya, see you.
Sampai ketemu.
Sampai ketemu. Thank you, Mr. Basil.
Thank you.